Sergeant Marcus Cole stood at attention in the gray metal office, while his commander threw a datapad onto the desk with a loud crack that made lesser soldiers jump. But Marcus did not even blink. "You disobeyed a direct order," Colonel Harrison growled, his face red with anger and his veins popping on his forehead like worms under skin. "I saved 43 civilians." "Sir," Marcus replied in a flat voice that carried no emotion, no regret. "Nothing but cold truth. You abandoned your position during active combat. The position was lost anyway, sir, and those people would have died." The colonel leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath that seemed to drain all the anger from his body, leaving behind only tired frustration and something that might have been grudging respect hidden deep in his eyes. "You are the best soldier I have ever trained, Cole. And that is exactly why this hurts me so much." Marcus said nothing because there was nothing to say when a man spoke truth. "The Galactic Concord has made a request." The colonel continued, picking up another datapad and sliding it across the desk. "They want a human to serve as personal guard for Queen Vathri of the Silori Dominion." "The bugs, sir?" "Do not call them that where anyone can hear you," the colonel warned, though a small smile cracked his stern face for just a moment. "They are our allies now, Cole, and you will treat them with respect even if they spent the first 3 years of contact trying to exterminate our species." Marcus picked up the datapad and scanned through the information with quick eyes trained to absorb battlefield intelligence in seconds rather than minutes. The Silori were an insectoid species with crystalline exoskeletons and compound eyes that could see in spectrums humans could not even imagine. And they had ruled a significant portion of the galaxy for over 10,000 years before humanity burst onto the scene with nuclear fire and stubborn refusal to die quietly. The war had lasted only 3 years, but it had been brutal beyond measure, with humanity fighting tooth and nail for every planet, every moon, every asteroid that the Silori tried to claiming the end. The Silori had offered peace not because they were losing, but because they had calculated that exterminating humanity would cost them more resources than the species was worth. Humans found this insulting but accepted anyway because survival mattered more than pride. "Why me, sir?" Marcus asked without looking up from the datapad. "Because you are being punished, Cole, and because the Concord specifically requested someone who has demonstrated loyalty beyond reason. Loyalty to civilians is not beyond reason." "Sir." The colonel stood and walked to the window that looked out over the red dust of Mars, where humanity had built its second great civilization after nearly destroying the first one back on Earth. "The Queen is important to the peace, Cole, and there are factions within the Silori who do not want peace, who see humanity as a virus that must be burned out before it spreads, and they want a human guarding their queen. They want to show that humans can be trusted, that we can serve loyally even those we once fought against, that we are more than the violent primitives they believe us to be." Marcus set down the datapad and finally met his commander's eyes with a gaze that had seen too much death to be anything but steady. "When do I leave?" "Sir." 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the docking bay of the Silori flagship known as the Eternal Lattice, and nothing in his 20 years of military service had prepared him for what he saw. The ship was alive. Walls of crystal pulsed with soft blue and purple light that seemed to breathe in slow rhythms like a sleeping giant. And the floor beneath his boots hummed with energy that he could feel traveling up through his legs and into his chest. The Silori warriors flanked the entrance to the throne room, their mantis-like bodies standing over 8 feet tall with blade arms folded against their thoraxes in what Marcus assumed was a resting position. Their compound eyes tracked him with obvious contempt as he walked past, and he heard clicking sounds that his translator implant rendered as words he pretended not to understand. "Look at the soft one." One guard clicked to another. No shell, no blades, no venom, and they send this to guard the Eternal Mother? It will not last a week, the other replied with what might have been laughter. These humans break so easily when you apply proper pressure. Marcus kept walking without reaction because he had learned long ago that the best response to underestimation was demonstration rather than argument. The throne room opened before him like the inside of a geode, with crystalline formations jutting from every surface and light refracting through 1,000 angles to create rainbows that danced across his skin in there. Upon a throne that seemed to have grown from the floor like a living thing, sat Queen Vathari herself. She was terrifying and beautiful in equal measure, her form elegant despite its alien nature. With 4 arms folded in complex patterns across her torso and compound eyes that shifted through colors, Marcus had no names for her. Carapace was translucent like frosted glass, and he could see faint shapes moving beneath it. Organs and fluids and things he did not want to think about too deeply. "You are the human," she said, and her voice was like wind chimes made of ice, cold and clear and somehow sharp enough to cut. "Sergeant Marcus Cole, Your Majesty. Assigned as your personal guard by the Galactic Concord and Earth Military Command. I did not ask for your designation. Human." I stated a fact. She rose from her throne and descended the steps toward him with a grace that made his soldier's instincts scream warnings about predators and prey. And he had to force himself to remain still as she circled him like a buyer examining livestock at market. "You are small," she observed. "Soft, as my guards noted, with no natural weapons and skin that tears at the slightest provocation. Yes, Your Majesty. Your species has held space travel for less than 400 years, while mine has ruled the stars for millennia beyond counting. Yes, Your Majesty." And yet, her eyes shifted to a deep crimson that his briefing materials had identified as curiosity mixed with irritation. "Your kind fought us to a standstill with nothing but stubbornness and crude nuclear fire." Marcus did not respond because she had not asked a question. The Queen stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell something like copper and honey emanating from her crystalline form. And she tilted her head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "My guards believe you will break within a week," she said. "I have decided to test this theory immediately." She gestured with one of her upper arms toward a spot on the floor near her throne, a bare circle of crystal that pulsed with faint light. "You will stand there without moving until I dismiss you, human. And you will not speak or shift or show any sign of weakness." Marcus walked to the circle and took his position at perfect attention, hands at his sides and eyes fixed forward. And he began to wait. The first hour was easy because standing at attention was something he had done since basic training, and his body knew how to lock itself into position without conscious thought. The second hour brought stiffness to his joints and a dull ache in his lower back that reminded him he was not as young as he used to be by the third hour. His legs were trembling with the effort of remaining perfectly still, and sweat had begun to drip down his face in slow rivers that he could not wipe away. The Solori guards watched with growing interest as the human refused to break, and he heard their clicking commentary shift from mockery to confusion to something that might have been the beginning of respect. "Why does it not stop?" one asked another. "Perhaps it is too stupid to know it should," came the reply. But there was uncertainty in the clicking. Now the Queen said nothing throughout the ordeal, simply watching from her throne with eyes that cycled through colors Marcus could not interpret. But he felt her attention like a physical weight pressing down on his shoulders. Hour 4 brought pain that radiated through every muscle in his body, and his vision began to blur at the edges as his brain fought against the punishment he was inflicting upon it. Hour 5 was agony beyond anything he had experienced outside of actual combat, and he had to bite his tongue until he tasted blood just to keep from screaming by hour 6. Marcus was operating on nothing but spite and stubborn refusal to let these alien bastards see him fall. And when the Queen finally raised her hand and spoke the word of dismissal, his legs gave out and he dropped to one knee with a crash that echoed through the crystal chamber. He expected mockery or contempt, but when he raised his eyes to the Queen's face, he saw something else entirely. Her eyes had shifted to a color he had not seen before, a soft violet that his briefing materials had not covered. And she was looking at him as though he were a puzzle she had not expected to find. "You may rest now, human," she said, and there was something different in her voice, something almost warm beneath the ice. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Marcus managed through cracked lips and a throat dry as Martian Sandy pulled himself to his feet through sheer will and limped toward the door, feeling every one of his 38 years in his aching bones. But he walked with his head held high because a soldier never showed weakness to the enemy. And, though the Silori were supposed to be allies now, Marcus was not entirely sure the Queen knew the difference. What he did not see as he left was the way Vathori's violet eyes followed him all the way to the door, or the way her 4 hands clenched against her throne with an emotion she had not felt in centuries. Something had changed in that crystal cham asterisk. 3 months passed aboard the Eternal Lattice, and Marcus Cole learned to navigate the crystal corridors without getting lost, to eat the strange nutrient pastes the Silori provided without gagging, and to ignore the constant clicking commentary of guards who still could not believe a soft human had lasted longer than a week. He had earned something close to respect from a few of the younger Silori, warriors who had watched him train in the ship's combat arena and seen that humans, while lacking natural weapons, were terrifyingly creative when it came to violence. But it was the Queen who confused him most of all. She had begun summoning him for private audiences, calling him to her chambers at odd hours with requests that made no tactical sense. "Tell me about human music," she would say, her eyes shifting through curious shades of amber and gold. "Why do your kind create sounds that serve no purpose beyond causing emotional responses?" "It makes us feel things, Your Majesty," Marcus would answer, struggling to explain concepts that had never required explanation before. Happiness or sadness or excitement. "And sometimes we just like the way it sounds. You create art simply because you enjoy it?" Her compound eyes would blink in rapid patterns that his translator could not interpret. "There is no practical function, no evolutionary advantage, no benefit to the species. Not everything needs a purpose, Your Majesty." This answer seemed to disturb her more than any other, and she would dismiss him with a wave of her 4 hands while her eyes churned through colors he was slowly learning to read. The questions continued night after night. She asked about human laughter and why they made strange sounds when something amused them, and Marcus found himself telling her about his father's terrible jokes that had made the whole family groan even as they smiled. She asked about human tears and why liquid leaked from their eyes when they experienced strong emotions. And Marcus hesitated before answering because this touched on wounds he kept buried deep. "I had a sister," he finally said, standing at attention before her throne while crystal light painted shadows across his face. "Her name was Elena, and she died in the war. During a Silori raid on our colony when I was too young to fight and too small to help." The Queen leaned forward on her throne, eyes shifting to a deep blue that he had never seen before. "You still feel pain for this loss, even after many years have passed." "Every day, Your Majesty. But she is dead and cannot return. So what purpose does this pain serve?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten as old grief stirred in his chest. "I do not know if it serves a purpose, but I still talk to her photo before I sleep. And I tell her about my day and ask her advice even though she cannot answer." "You speak to an image of someone who no longer exists?" "Yes, Your Majesty. This is madness," the Queen said. but her voice carried something other than judgment. Something that might have been wonder or horror, or both tangled together in ways she could not separate. Maybe it is. Marcus agreed. But it helps me remember that she mattered, that her life meant something, that she was real even if she is gone now. The queen fell silent for a long moment. And when she finally spoke, her voice had lost its usual ice. Among my kind, death is simply recycling, and when a Salori falls, their body is returned to the hive to nourish new generations, and no one speaks their designation again because they have served their purpose. That sounds efficient. Your Majesty, it is efficient, she agreed. But her eyes had shifted to that troubled violet again. And yet your way sounds more. Though I cannot find the word for what I mean. The attacks began 2 weeks after that conversation. Marcus had been patrolling the outer corridor of the Queen's chambers, when his combat instincts screamed a warning that made him spin around just in time to see a vent cover burst open and small winged creatures pour into the hallway like a living flood. Thornwings, his briefing materials supplied instantly. Parasitic insects whose venom could kill a Salori in minutes and would certainly kill a human even faster. He did not think about what he was doing, did not calculate odds or measure risks. Simply ran toward the Queen's chamber door and burst through it with his shoulder already aching from the lies. Impact Vithari stood in the center of her room, forearms raised in a defensive posture that would do nothing against creatures small enough to slip between her blade strikes, and her eyes were wide with something Marcus had never seen in her before: fear. The Thornwings came through the door behind him, hundreds of them with stingers glistening in the crystal light. And Marcus did the only thing that made sense to his soldier's brain. He threw himself over the Queen. His body covered hers as completely as he could manage, his arms wrapping around her crystalline form while the Thornwings descended upon them in a buzzing cloud of death. And he felt stinger after stinger pierce his skin. One sting, then 5, then 10, then more than he could count as the venomous insects attacked the only soft target available to them. "What are you doing?" The Queen screamed beneath him, her voice cracking with an emotion her species was not supposed to feel. "My job." Marcus grunted through teeth, clenched against the fire spreading through his. Vainsilori guards burst through the door seconds later, their blade arms flashing as they cut down the Thornwings with precise strikes. But Marcus barely noticed because the venom had begun its work and his world was dissolving into pain and darkness. He collapsed beside the Queen, his body convulsing as poison raced through blood vessels never meant to encounter such chemistry. And the last thing he heard before unconsciousness claimed him was Vathari, screaming for her physicians in a voice that held no ice at all. He drifted through 3 days of fever dreams where Elena visited him and told him he had always been too stubborn for his own good, where his father laughed at jokes that made no sense, where his mother sang songs from a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else, and through it all, he was aware of a presence beside him, a cool touch against his burning skin, eyes that watched him with colors he could not name even in dreams. When Marcus finally opened his eyes, he found himself in a medical bay, surrounded by Salori physicians who clicked their mandibles in rapid patterns of disbelief. 17 stings. One was saying to another, "No species has ever survived even 3 doses of Thornwing venom." "His immune system is chaos," another replied. "It adapted to the toxin even as it was killing him, changing its approach hundreds of times per second until it found a configuration that could fight back. This should not be possible. And yet he lives." Marcus turned his head, every muscle screaming in protest at the movement, and found Queen Vathari sitting beside his bed. She looked different somehow, though he could not identify what had changed at first. And then he realized it was her posture, curved and close instead of rigid and regal, with all 4 hands resting on the edge of his bed as though she needed to be near him. "You did not leave," He croaked through a throat that felt like sand and glass. "No," she agreed. And her eyes were that deep violet again, troubled and wondering and beautiful in ways that hurt to look at directly. "How long?" "3 days, and I have not left your side in all that time." "Why, Your Majesty?" She did not answer for a long moment, her compound eyes searching his face as though looking for something she could not name. "You would have died for me," she finally said. And it was not a question, but a statement of fact that seemed to confuse her. A human dying to protect the Siluri Queen, throwing himself between poison and someone who was his enemy less than 5 years ago. "It is my job." "Your Majesty." "No." She shook her head in a gesture she must have learned from watching him. "Jobs do not make people sacrifice themselves." "And something else drove you to do what you did." "Something I do not understand," Marcus laughed weakly, which sent pain shooting through his chest. "Honestly, Your Majesty, I do not fully understand it either. But you are not so bad once you stop being terrifying." Her eyes flickered through a dozen colors he could not interpret. "I do not understand what you mean by that. It was a joke." "Your Majesty, I do not understand jokes either," she said. But something in her voice suggested she wanted to. "Perhaps you will teach me." "Perhaps I will," Marcus agreed. And he closed his eyes to rest while the Queen, who had once called him a primitive, remained at his bedside, watching over him with eyes that held colors no Siluri had displayed in 10,000 years. Neither of them knew it yet, but something had changed in that moment. Something that would shake the foundations of two civilizations and rewrite the rules of what was possible between human and alien. The Queen had begun to feel, and in a society that considered emotion a disease, that made her the most dangerous being in the galaxy. 6 months had passed since Marcus Cole had first stepped aboard the Eternal Lattice, and everything had changed in ways he could not have imagined when he accepted this assignment as punishment for saving lives. The Queen summoned him every night now, not for interrogations about human nature, but for something that felt dangerously close to companionship. And Marcus found himself looking forward to these meetings in ways that made his soldiers' discipline whisper warnings he tried very hard to ignore. "Show me more of your world," Vatiri would say, settling onto cushions she had ordered crafted specifically for their talks. A crystalline form, catching light in ways that made her seem to glow from within Marcus, would pull out his datapad and scroll through images of Earth that he had carried with him through a decade of military service. Photos of oceans that stretched to horizons, and forests so green they hurt to look at, and cities where millions of humans lived in impossible towers of glass and steel. "Your species builds such things for beauty as well as function?" the Queen asked one night, her eyes shifting through soft ambers as she studied an image of the Sagrada Familia Cathedral. "We build them to honor things we believe in," Marcus explained, "or to remember people we have lost, or sometimes just because someone dreamed of something impossible and refused to stop until they made it real." "Dreams." Vatiri repeated the word slowly as though tasting it. "My kind does not dream, and when we rest, our minds simply stop until waking begins again." "Never?" Marcus found this sad in ways he could not explain. "Never. And I did not know this was unusual until you began telling me about the images that visit humans during sleep." She reached out with one of her upper hands and touched the screen where a photo of a sunset over the Pacific Ocean painted the sky in oranges and pinks and purples. That seemed to set the world on fire. "This is beautiful," she said. And Marcus heard wonder in her voice, raw and new and dangerous. "It is just light refracting through atmospheric particles." "Your Majesty." "Yes, and it is beautiful," she insisted, turning to face him with eyes that had shifted to colors he had never seen before. Soft pink and warm gold swirled together like paint mixing on a canvas. "Why can I suddenly see beauty, Marcus, when I have lived 400 years and never noticed it before?" He did not have an answer that would not terrify them both, so he said nothing and let the silence speak instead. The changes in the queen did not go unnoticed by her court. Marcus overheard the whispered clicking of her handmaidens when they thought he was too far away to hear, their mandibles moving in rapid patterns of concern and confusion. "Have you seen the colors in her eyes?" one asked another outside the queen's chambers. "They are wrong, and no queen has displayed such hues in millennia. Perhaps she is ill, and we should summon the physicians of mind to examine her. Do not be foolish, because if the council learns of this, they will demand an evaluation. And you know what that means." Marcus memorized the word and looked it up in his translation database later that night. And what he found made his blood run cold in his veins. Velthary was the Silori term, roughly translated as soul fracture or mind break, and it referred to a condition where a queen's consciousness began to separate from the hive mind, developing individual thoughts and emotions that were not shared with the collective. It was considered a disease, a corruption, a failure of breeding, so severe that the infected queen would be executed and replaced with a pure vessel grown. In the birthing chambers, the condition had not been seen in 10,000 years because the Silori had bred it out of their queens generations ago, ensuring that their rulers remained perfect servants of the hive, rather than individuals who might put personal desires above collective needs. And yet here was Velthary, displaying colors that Marcus was slowly learning to read as affection and curiosity and wonder, asking questions about beauty and dreams and love as though these concepts were doors she had just discovered in walls she thought she knew. He should have reported this to his commanders, should have requested reassignment, should have done anything except what he actually did, which was continue meeting with the queen every night and pretending he did not see the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. It was Velthary herself who finally spoke the truth aloud. She summoned him to her private garden, a chamber deep within the ship where crystalline plants grew in patterns that shifted with her moods. And when Marcus arrived, he found her standing among flowers that pulsed with anxious red light. "Something is happening to me," she said without greeting or preamble, her voice stripped of its usual royal ice. "I think and feel things that no queen should think or feel. And they all began when you came aboard this ship. Your Majesty, do not." She cut him off with a gesture that made the flowers around them pulse brighter. "Do not give me titles when I am trying to speak truth, and my name is Velthary, which you have never used because protocol does not permit it. But I find I want to hear it from your lips." Marcus swallowed against a throat that had gone dry. Velthary, her eyes blazed with colors he could not name. "Beautiful and terrible all at once. Better," she whispered. And she moved toward him with a grace that made his heart pound against his ribs. "I have been trying to understand what you have done to me, Marcus. And I think I finally have the answer." "What answer is that?" "You broke something in me," she said, stopping close enough that he could feel the strange heat radiating from her crystalline form. "Or perhaps you awakened something that was always there, sleeping beneath the programming my creators built into my genes. I do not understand." "Neither do I," she admitted. And there was fear in her voice now, raw and new and so human it made him ache. "But I know that when I watched you stand in pain for 6 hours simply to prove yourself, something shifted inside me, and when you threw yourself over my body to protect me from poison, something cracked. And now when I look at you, I feel things that my people would call corruption." Marcus should have stepped back, should have maintained the distance that protocol and common sense demanded. But he found his feet rooted to the crystalline floor, as though the ship itself had decided he would not run. "What things do you feel?" he asked, though he already knew the answer and feared it as much. As he wanted it, Velthary's 4 hands reached out and touched his face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone with blade arms sharp enough to cut steel. I feel like your happiness matters. More than my own, she said. I feel like the universe makes more sense when you are nearby. I feel like I would burn worlds to keep you safe. And these feelings are not efficient or logical or useful to the hive. Those feelings have a name. Marcus heard himself say through lips that trembled despite all his training. I know, Bathory replied. The humans call it love, and I have been studying your literature to understand what has infected me. It is not an infection. The Silori would disagree. And if my rivals discover what I have become, they will demand an evaluation of purity, and I will fail. And they will kill me and grow a new queen who does not feel these terrible, wonderful things. Marcus's hands rose to cover hers where they rested on his face. Two species touching in a way that should have felt wrong, but instead felt like the most natural thing in the galaxy. I will not let them hurt you, he promised. You are one human against an empire. Marcus, yes, he agreed, and that should terrify them. Because humans do not know how to stop fighting for people they love. The queen's eyes shifted to that soft violet that had haunted his dreams for weeks. And when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. You love me? Marcus thought about lying, about maintaining the professional distance that his training demanded, about all the reasons this was impossible and forbidden and dangerous, beyond measure. Then he thought about Elena telling him to stop being a coward and just admit when something mattered. Yes, he said, I think I have loved you since I watched you sit alone on your throne and realized that being a queen meant being lonely in ways that no one should have to endure. Bathory made a sound that might have been a sob if Silori could cry, and she pressed her forehead against his in a gesture that crossed all species boundaries. They will come for me soon, she whispered against his skin. My rivals have already begun to notice the changes, and it is only a matter of time before they demand the evaluation. Then we will face them together. You would fight your own kind's allies for me? I would fight anyone for you, Marcus promised. And he meant every word with a certainty that would have frightened him if he had stopped to think about it above them. The crystalline flowers of the queen's garden shifted from anxious red to hopeful gold, responding to emotions their creator had never been supposed to feel. And somewhere in the political corridors of the ship, the queen's rivals gathered and plotted and prepared to destroy the corruption that had infected their perfect ruler, never suspecting that the real infection was not emotion but freedom, and it would spread far beyond anything they could imagine. The summons came at dawn when the ship's artificial lights shifted from sleep blue to wake gold, and Marcus Cole knew the moment he saw the seal on the message that everything had changed. The Council of Elders had demanded an evaluation of purity for Queen Bathory, citing concerns about unusual behavior patterns and emotional instability that rendered her unfit to serve as vessel for the hive mind. Marcus found Bathory in her chambers, standing before a mirror of polished crystal with all four of her hands pressed flat against the surface as though she could push through to some other world where none of this was happening. They have called for the evaluation, she said without turning around, and her voice had gone flat in a way that scared him more than any display of emotion ever could. I know. The probe will search my mind for individual attachment, for personal emotion, for anything that separates me from the collective, she continued. And they will find everything, Marcus, because I cannot hide what you have awakened in me any more than I could hide the color of my eyes. He crossed the room and stood behind her, close enough to touch, but not quite touching because he needed her to see his face reflected in the crystal beside her own. Then fight them, she laughed, and it was a bitter sound that cut like broken glass. Fight the Council of Elders, fight 10,000 years of tradition. Fight the very programming written into my genetics. And you make it sound so simple. I did not say it would be easy, Marcus replied. But I have seen you do impossible things, Bathory. And I have seen you change in ways your people say cannot happen. So why should this be any different? Because they will be inside my mind, Marcus. And the elders are ancient beyond imagining, with psychic power that could crush your human consciousness like an insect beneath a boot. Then do not let them in. She finally turned to face him, and her eyes were cycling through colors so fast he could barely track them. Fear and anger and love and despair all tangled together in a display that would have condemned her instantly, if any council member had seen it. No one has ever resisted an evaluation, she said. No queen has ever had something worth resisting for, Marcus countered, and he reached out to take her upper hands in his own, human fingers intertwining with crystalline digits in a grip that felt like defiance made physical. You truly believe I can do this? I believe you are the strongest person I have ever met. And I believe that the woman who sat through 3 days beside my sickbed, refusing to leave, is not someone who gives up when things get hard. A tremor ran through her body, and her eyes finally settled on that soft violet that Marcus had learned to read as love. Will you be there? She asked. They have forbidden me from attending. That was not my question. Marcus smiled with a grimness that would have made his old drill sergeant proud. Wild horses could not keep me away, and whatever wild horses means in Sci-Lori, the evaluation chamber was located in the heart of the ship. A vast crystalline dome where the Council of Elders sat in concentric circles around a platform that glowed with psychic energy, strong enough to make Marcus's teeth ache from 3 corridors away. He had tried to enter through the main doors and been stopped by 4 guards who looked at him with something between contempt and pity. The human cannot enter. One had clicked. This is sacred Sci-Lori business. I am the Queen's personal guard, and my place is beside her. Your place is wherever we say it is, soft one. And today, that place is far from here. Marcus had nodded as though accepting their judgment, then waited until they looked away before breaking the arm of the nearest guard with a move his combat instructor had called the Persuader. The fight that followed was brutal but brief, and Marcus did not have time to feel guilty about the 2 unconscious Sci-Lori he left behind as he sprinted toward the chamber doors with blood dripping from cuts on his face and fire burning in his chest. More guards tried to stop him at the inner entrance, and these ones were smarter, fighting in formation with blade arms that could have sliced him in half if he made a single mistake. He made no mistakes. Years of combat training and a lifetime of stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds carried him through the fight, like a storm through paper walls. And when he finally burst through the chamber doors, he left 4 more guards groaning on the floor behind him. Every elder in the chamber turned to stare at the bleeding human who had just fought his way into their most sacred space, and their compound eyes blazed with outrage that made the air itself feel heavy. How dare you defile this place with your presence? The senior elder roared, rising from their seat with blade arms extended. Seize him! But before any guard could move, Marcus had crossed the space between the door and the central platform, where Vathari knelt with her head bowed and 3 elders hovering over her with their hands pressed to her crystalline skull. You want her, Marcus snarled, pulling the combat knife from his belt and dropping into a fighting stance that promised death to anyone who came close. You'd go through me first. You would die for this corrupted creature? The senior elder demanded. I would kill for her, Marcus corrected. Dying is just what happens if I do not kill enough of you first. On the platform, Vathari raised her head, and Marcus saw that her eyes were blazing white, a color that made every elder in the chamber recoil with shock. They found my love for you, she said, and her voice resonated through the dome like a bell being struck. They tried to rip it from my mind, to burn it out and leave me hollow as they want their queens to be. Vathari, but I did not let them, she continued, rising to her feet with a grace that seemed to defy gravity itself. Because you taught me that some things are worth fighting for, Marcus. And I decided that what I feel for you is worth more than their approval, or their traditions, or their precious hive mind. The three elders who had been probing her mind collapsed to the floor, their compound eyes flickering in patterns that suggested their psychic attack had backfired spectacularly. "This is impossible," the senior elder whispered. "No queen has ever resisted the evaluation, and no queen has ever forced the probers back into their own minds." "Perhaps," they three said, turning to face the council with eyes still blazing that impossible white. "That is because no queen has ever had something worth protecting until now." She descended from the platform and walked to stand beside Marcus, her four hands reaching out to grip his arm in a gesture that left no doubt about where her loyalties lay. "I am still your queen," she said to the assembled elders, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority. "And I have learned something from this human that your hive mind never taught me. What corruption has he infected you with?" The senior elder demanded. "Individuality," Vathri replied. "The knowledge that I am not simply a vessel for your collective will, but a person in my own right, with desires and dreams and love that belong to no one but myself. This is heresy." "Perhaps it is," she agreed. "But this heretic still stands while your probers lie broken at her feet. So perhaps you should consider what that means before you threaten her again." Marcus felt pride swell in his chest as he watched the woman he loved face down an empire of ancient powers with nothing but her own awakened will. And he knew in that moment that he would follow her anywhere, fight anyone, burn any world that tried to take her from him. "You want her," he repeated to the council, his voice carrying a human certainty that made several of the younger elders flinch. "You go through us, and for the first time in 10,000 years." The council of elders looked at a human and felt something that might have been fear. The standoff held for a long moment that stretched like eternity. And then the senior elder made a gesture that silenced the chamber. "We will deliberate," they said, "and the queen will await our judgment in her chambers." "The queen," Vathri said, with ice returning to her voice, "will await your judgment wherever she pleases, and her guard will remain at her side." She turned and walked toward the doors, and Marcus walked beside her. And together they left a council of ancient psychic powers in stunned silence behind them. Something had changed in the Solori Dominion that day, something that could not be put back to sleep. And it had started with a stubborn human who refused to let the universe tell him what was impossible. The council deliberated for 7 days while Marcus and Vathri waited in her chambers, surrounded by crystalline flowers that had bloomed into colors no Salori botanist had ever recorded. Word of what had happened in the evaluation chamber spread through the ship like fire through dry grass, and reactions varied from horror to fascination, depending on who was telling the story. Older Salori clicked their mandibles in disgust and called the queen corrupted, broken, a failure of genetics that should have been culled generations ago. But the younger ones, the warriors and workers who had grown up in the shadow of the human war, they looked at their queen with something that might have been curiosity or envy or hope. "They are talking about you in the mess halls," Marcus reported after one of his patrols, during which he had pretended not to understand the clicking conversations happening all around him. "What are they saying?" Vathri asked from her seat among the flowers. "The young ones are asking questions that the old ones do not want to answer. Questions about individuality and emotion, and whether the hive mind is truly the only way for Salori to exist. Dangerous questions. The best questions usually are on the 8th day." The council's verdict arrived, and it was both better and worse than either of them had expected. "Exile," Vathari read from the official document, her voice steady despite the weight of the word. "I am to be stripped of my connection to the hive mind and expelled from Salori space with only those who choose to follow me. They are not executing you? They do not dare," she said with a thin smile that held no joy. My resistance to the probers frightened them more than they want to admit. And they fear what might happen if they try to kill me and fail. So exile is their way of getting rid of you without the risk. Yes. And they expect me to wither and die once separated from the collective. Because no queen has ever survived without the hive mind to sustain her. Marcus crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her lower hands in his, while her upper hands reached down to touch his face. You will not wither, he promised. You will not die, and you will build something new that proves them wrong about everything they believe. How can you be so certain? Because you have already done impossible things, he reminded her. And because you will not be alone. The Galactic Concord sent a message the next day, offering Marcus an honorable discharge and transport back to Earth with full recognition for his service under impossible circumstances. His commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, appeared on screen looking older and more tired than Marcus had ever seen him. You did good work out there, Cole, the colonel said. Diplomacy with the Solori has improved more in the last 6 months than in the previous 5 years. And most of that is because of you. Thank you. Sir, come home, son, and take the discharge with honor. And let the aliens sort out their own problems. Marcus looked at the screen for a long moment, thinking about Earth with its blue oceans and green forests and the grave where Elena rested under a simple stone marker. And he felt the pull of home like a physical ache in his chest. Then he looked at Vathery, standing at the window with starlight painting her crystalline form in silver and gold. And he knew there was really no choice to make at all. With respect, sir, I have to decline. Cole, my assignment was to guard the Queen, and the Queen is not dead. So the assignment is not over. The colonel stared at him through the screen with eyes that saw more than Marcus wanted to show. This is not about duty, is it? No, sir. You love her. Yes, sir. A long silence stretched between Earth and the stars. And then Colonel Harrison did something Marcus had never seen him do in 20 years of service. He smiled. Your father was the same way, the colonel said softly. Fell in love with a woman from Mars back when Earth and Mars were still shooting at each other. And when I told him it was impossible, he laughed in my face and married her anyway. I did not know that. Sir, there are a lot of things you do not know, Cole, but you have always known the important ones. Like when to disobey orders and when to follow your heart, even when it leads somewhere impossible. He raised his hand in a salute that carried more respect than any words could express. Good luck, Sergeant, and take care of your queen. Yes, sir, Marcus replied. Returning the salute with tears he refused to let fall. I will. Sir, the day of exile arrived under artificial lights that seemed dimmer than usual, as though the ship itself mourned the departure of its queen. Vathery stood in the docking bay beside a small vessel that would carry her into the unknown, surrounded by the few dozen Solori who had chosen to follow her into exile rather than remain with a hive that had betrayed their ruler. They were mostly young, these rebels, warriors and workers and scientists who looked at their queen with the same curious hope Marcus had seen spreading through the ship like a beautiful infection. You do not have to do this, Vathery said to Marcus as the final preparations were completed. You could still go home to your Earth and your oceans and the grave where your sister sleeps. Home is not a place, Marcus replied, reaching out to take her hand in the gesture that had become natural between them despite all the reasons it should not be. Home is people, and you are my people now. Just me? Just you is enough. She made that sound again, the one that might have been a sob if Solori could cry. And she pulled him close with all 4 of her arms in an embrace that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. I do not know where we will go, she whispered against his hair, or what we will build, or how we will survive outside the only society I have ever known. We will figure it out together. Such human optimism. It has served us well so far. The ship that carried them away from the Eternal Lattice was small and cramped, and nothing like the Crystalline Palace Vathery had called home for 4 centuries. But as Marcus watched her stand at the viewport, with starlight painting her eyes in colors that spoke of hope and love and fierce determination, he thought she had never looked more beautiful. "They gave me exile as a punishment," she said as unfamiliar stars wheeled past the window. "But I think they have given me something else entirely. What is that?" She turned to face him with eyes settled on that warm amber that made his heart beat faster. "Freedom," she said. "The chance to be something other than what they made me. To choose my own path and my own purpose and my own love. That sounds terrifying." "It is," she agreed, "and it is wonderful. And I do not think I would trade it for anything in the galaxy." Marcus smiled and reached for her hand. Human fingers interlacing with crystalline digits in a grip that promised everything and demanded nothing. "I'm told," Vathery said carefully, as though reciting something she had studied very hard to learn, "that among your kind, when 2 people hold hands like this, it indicates a bond. Something like that. I would like to learn more about these bonds." Marcus looked at the alien queen who had been his enemy, and his assignment, and his friend, and his love. And he felt a certainty settle into his bones that had nothing to do with military training or combat discipline. "We have got time," he said, behind them. The loyal Salori, who had chosen exile over conformity, gathered at other viewports to watch the stars. And Marcus saw the same curious hope in their compound eyes that burned in there. Queen humanity had always been told they were emotional primitives. Soft creatures driven by feelings that served no practical purpose. A species too stubborn and too strange to fit into the orderly galaxy the ancient powers had built. But as Marcus stood hand in hand with Vathery, while unknown stars beckoned them toward unknown futures, he realized that maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Not efficiency or logic or the cold perfection of collective minds, but the chaotic, beautiful, messy miracle of individual souls, choosing to love each other against all odds. The Silori had exiled their queen to punish her for becoming too human. They had not realized they were setting her free, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a new kind of civilization was being born. One built on the radical, dangerous, wonderful idea that every heart matters, every voice deserves to be heard. And love is worth any cost. Marcus Cole had been assigned to guard an alien queen, and no one had warned him about her feelings. But as he looked at Vathery's eyes glowing with warmth and watched her mouth curve into a smile she had learned from watching him, he decided that her feelings were the best thing that had ever happened to either of them, and that was a very human way to end a story. But then again, this had always been a very human story. Even when it was about aliens, especially when it was about aliens, because in the end, the most alien thing in the galaxy turned out to be something every species could learn if they were brave enough to try. The courage to feel, the strength to love, and the stubborn refusal to let the universe tell you that some things are impossible. That was what it meant to be human. And now, among the stars, it was what it meant to be free.